The severe setup is back in your life. Harry Powell, Ian O'Neill, back as always. We're going to take a look at a couple of fights and only a handful of fights from this weekend's Apex card. It is in the Apex. Yes, it is again. UFC Apex 89. What? They're getting all geared up now. We're getting close to the UFC Apex 100 card, Harry. I wonder who it'll be. Fucking Jairzinho Rosenstruck versus Marcin Tybura. It's made for it, isn't it? UFC 100 Apex main event. We're a little bit away from that. Let's pay a little bit more close attention to what we do have in front of us this weekend, and that's a pretty good fight in the main event and not a great undercard underneath. But like I said, let's talk Amanda Ribas, Rose Namajunas at 125 pounds. Very, very interesting fight here. Tug Rose obviously made the move up to fight Manon Fiorot, lost that fight. She goes in against Amanda Ribas at 125. Always good to see Tug Rose back in action. I like the move up to 125 for her, and I like this fight and this main event for her as well. I think it can really get the ball moving for Tug Rose at 125 after that disappointing defeat to Manon Fiorot. What do you think of this fight? What do you think of, Rose's situation currently in the UFC? And your thoughts on Amanda Ribas's chances in this one, Harry?
So it's very, very, very well detailed that Rose Namajunas is one of my favorite fighters of all time. Just because the style and the way she fights and everything else, the sort of evolution of her as a fighter to me was just amazing. I think my worry coming in here is this is 3 fights, her third fight in 3 years, right? We had a fight in 2022, we had a fight in 2023, then we had the 2020. Now we've got this in 2024. Thankfully, it's early enough in 2024, and I'm hoping that Rose is in the headspace where she is still committed to competing. She has talked before about not really enjoying MMA before, not really enjoying the competition aspect of MMA. And that's a problem, right? Like that's a significant problem, especially for somebody as elite as Rose Namajunas. Now, she came in against Manon Fiorot at her 125-pound debut. It was a good fight, competitive fight. Fiorot did a good job. Won that fight. I think Rose picked up an injury early in that fight. I think a hand injury, if I remember rightly. Fair play to me. That's a good memory. But I thought she looked fine with one hand, right? And I think maybe with 2 hands, the fight looks different. Against Amanda Ribas, it's still a rising prospect at 125 pounds. Amanda Ribas has looked great of recent. I think specifically, what does it do? And how does it look on paper? Well, if Rose turns up, she smashes Amanda Ribas to pieces.
I agree. I think that's the biggest kind of point in this fight is that we're going to find out if Rose Namajunas still has it or still wants it. I think she has it, all right? I think she does have it, but does she still want it? And the interesting comment you made about her activity is down to more of a mental battle rather than a skills battle. And she's in a peculiar situation where she doesn't like being in the spotlight. She doesn't enjoy being the champion. And that's why we haven't seen her fight all that much. Now, the added factor possibly of a weight cut too. She might not enjoy cutting down to 115 anymore, and that's well within her rights. I wouldn't think that she was a particularly big 115 pounder. I don't think she's a particularly big 125 pounder either, but she does match up quite well here. I mean, we're coming off a win for Amanda Ribas over Luana Pinheiro, decent fighter too in her own right, but this is absolutely the biggest test in Amanda Ribas's career so far. And there has been a trend too when Amanda Ribas has come against certain level of competition, such as Rose Namajunas. Early on in her career before UFC, it was Polyana Viana that took her out. Marina Rodriguez gave Amanda Ribas her first UFC loss. Caitlin Sermonara, formerly Chukagan, another loss there, and more recent times a loss to Macy Barber. So this trend of a particular level of opponent that Amanda Ribas comes up against, we mentioned the likes of Gerald Meerschaert and Thiago Moises on the breakdown this week, Harry. And I know I'm kind of I'm putting the writing on the wall here before it actually happens. But another loss here for Amanda Ribas would suggest that she does have a ceiling and a certain level of opponent that she's always going to struggle against, and that level of opponent would be elite quality.
Absolutely. And look, I think what's super crazy about this as well is Rose Namajunas is only 31. Having been in around the UFC basically since she was a teenager. I mean, she wasn't a teenager, but she was a very, 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 very young fighter. You are soaking up all that experience, right? Rose Namajunas, okay, she doesn't like to be in the spotlight, but notice how she's labeled as the B-side in this. Notice how, Amanda Ribas' name is the one on the left, right? Rose Namajunas will be walking out probably second. So people know that this is a Rose Namajunas comeback story, right? This is a Rose Namajunas. Can we come in? Can we get her to sort of slide her under the radar a little bit, bring her in, and let's see her just destroy Amanda Ribas, put on a perfect Rose performance, and then we say, okay, chuck me a Macy Barber, chuck me a Caitlin Seminara, chuck me a whatever, and then it's Rose title shot, right? Like I think that the 125-pound division is always pretty strong for the ladies, but when you add somebody of the gravity of Rose Namajunas to any division, then we are talking about a serious test. And for Amanda Ribas, I sort of completely agree. At least in the female divisions, there is a stark contrast between the elite levels of that division and then sort of everyone from ranked 7 and down. And I think for this specific one, as you have so beautifully wrapped up and tied a bow on, if Rose is mentally prepped for this and she walks in ready, confident and available, I think this is definitely done inside 5. I think Rose can out-grapple Ribas if it gets there. I think Rose can outstrike Amanda Ribas. We have seen the picture-perfect accuracy against Weili Zhang. We've seen the picture-perfect accuracy against Joanna Champion. Like, this is Rose Namajunas is a serious elite-level competitor, or at least was in the fights that we have seen her previously, right?
Absolutely.
So that's what this fight is about.
Yeah, 100%. Like, one final question. We talk about, the mental difficulties that Rose has had. Is there anything that Amanda Ribas can do to kind of get at that? Because I don't think skills for skills, I don't think, she has any hope here, but she can win certain mental battles in there on Saturday night. And I think an important one is a good start, and to go out there and to land heavy in round 1, with Rose Namajunas, she at times can have a tendency to start slow, at times has a tendency to start really quick. Ask Zhang Weili about that. And it's a very difficult puzzle to try and figure out for Amanda Ribas. But when you're looking at this fight, and obviously on paper, and what you've seen in the past from both of these fighters, is there anything that you can see that might give Amanda Ribas some hope coming in here?
Invest really, really heavily in your gas tank. And you go out, you go hard, you go fast. And you try to really, really stop Namajunas from setting a pace, from setting a rhythm. Because when she does, she glides around the map. She glides around the canvas. But we have seen, look at Jessica Andrade in the first fight, not the one where she got dumped, but the other one. She looked absolutely gorgeous for a round and a half. And Jessica was like, I'm still here, by the way, and I'm still looking for haymakers, and I'm going to slow you down. And she did. And Rose scraped through by the grit of her teeth, but we can be looking at something similar here from Amanda Ribas if she is significantly able to take the damage and land damage. The way to get to Rose Namajunas is damage and body work. And so if Ribas can build up an elite level gas tank and stick in and land damage and be fast and be gritty and be tough, she can get to Rose Namajunas.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. Yeah, good assessment on that card. Just run through another couple of fights. Co-main event, Carl Williams versus Justin Tafa at heavyweight. The old switcheroo with the Tafa brothers here. Edmund Shabazian versus AJ Dobson. Shabazian looking to come back after that loss in his last fight to Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. We've talked time and time again about Shabazian and his career. I think it's the same story here. I mean, it'd be interesting to see. Let's take a stop at a minute. Undefeated Peyton Talbott comes in against Cameron Saimann, the South African. You know, Saimann has been a guy we've had a close eye on. I know Spencer has had a good close eye on him throughout his career and spoken to him as well on SevereMMA. He's coming in against Peyton Talbott, undefeated, a guy who's coming off a good win against Nick Aguirre in his last fight off the Contender Series earlier on, or late last year, I should say. Thoughts on this one, Harry? I think I'm excited for this one because we get to see a Cameron Saimann coming in here that has lost his last fight and has a point to prove in this fight. And I love watching those kind of fights. As you know, undefeated guy getting defeated for the first time. You know, you show what you're really made of, I think, coming back off your first defeat of your career. And I'm very excited to see what Saimann brings to the table in this one.
I suspect that this is going to be a Saimann, to the best of his abilities, a Saimann masterclass. That's what I expect to see, right? Christian Rodriguez, as we saw against Bulgarian, is a very, very tough, very, very gritty fighter. Great gas tank, ability to anti-grapple, ability to counter-grapple, and can hit hard. That's a tough, tough ask for somebody of Cameron Saimann's infancy in the sport, in the game, in his UFC career. Peyton Talbott didn't look amazing, frankly, in his UFC debut. You go out, you get the win, you get the finish. Great, no problem. But this, I think, is the sort of fight that Cameron Saimann is able to win and able to win well. And you and I have talked about this ad nauseum. When I look through fights, specifically at the setup, I have like I put a pencil around a couple of names, highlights that I'm looking at for potential severe spotlights. And Cameron Saimann has a big old pencil around his name on this one because, you know, I really enjoy, and I've written about it before and I'll write about it again, when a professional fighter loses their first professional fight, especially in the UFC and especially at a young age, to watch them come back and how they combat that loss is always fascinating and is always demonstrable of the type of character that they are. And so I'm expecting Cameron Saimann to come out here and to look improved and to look calm and to look composed and to look like he took on the lessons from that last loss. I expect him to do that.
Yeah, indeed. Look at the spotlight is plugged in. The spotlight is facing on Cameron Saimann. It's up to Cameron Saimann to see if Harry Powell turns it on or not. We'll see him that Saturday night. I'm excited to see if he is worthy of the severe spotlight. I want to say he's been in there once before, has he?
He has indeed.
Yeah, so he could be making a second appearance, which is not unheard of when it comes to the severe spotlight. That being said, we've had a couple of people that have had 2 spotlights shone on them before. Has anyone had 3 yet?
I think one fighter has had 3. And I think it could be Ian Gary that's had 3.
Ooh, interesting. The future. Love it. Well, you know, you're talking about guys who you have circled on this. We have to stop on the next guy that I actually have circled, and it's a guy that I've spoken about before, and I'm delighted to see his name in here after his first UFC run didn't go to plan. Youssef Zalal is back. I talked highly of him after I seen him fight a very younger, less experienced at the time, Ilia Topuria in his first, or not, and which picked up his first UFC loss. You know, with Zalal came into the UFC, obviously picked up 3 wins and started facing higher level opponents. Lost to Ilia Topuria, lost to Sung Woo Choi, lost to Sean Woodson, and drew to Damon Blackshear. Like, I mean, apart from maybe Sung Woo Choi, you know, those are not that really bad a competition to be kind of facing it. And look at, even with Sung Woo Choi, he's still in there, he's still winning fights in the UFC. Isn't he supposed to be fighting on? Is that guy supposed to be fighting Sharia next?
Possibly. Yes, possibly.
Let me check. No, that's cancelled. That's not on anymore. Never mind. But look at Youssef Zalal coming in against Billy Quarantillo. You look at Billy Quarantillo, moves forward, strikes hard, strikes with great output, and always makes it an exciting fight. And so does Youssef Zalal. But I'm curious to see. You're excited to see how Saimann reacts. I'm delighted to see a Youssef Zalal who has been kicked from the UFC and has gone out of there and picked up 3 good wins in MMA, by finish, a boxing win and a kickboxing win to go about with as well. I don't know whether he's trying to get back into UFC or get back into one championship with a record like that, to be honest. But any thoughts on this one? Do you remember Zalal the first time he was in the UFC, Harry?
I do. He was one of the fighters that we pipped to do something in the division. I think that the problem with Zalal is that sometimes he can be a little passive, and because of the range and because of the size, sometimes what you get with those fighters is there's just not enough massive power to sort of gain big respect. I think in this Billy Q fight, Billy Q's not the most technical, but he can, as you've already said, he can crack, and he has a really good gas tank. If Yusuf Zalal is on here, then I think he could put on like a William Gomis type performance where he can skirt on the outside and he can kick the leg and he can keep going, he can jab all night long, he can throw a couple of right hands, he can throw some big shots and whatever. But what we need to make sure that doesn't happen here for Zalal is that he gets overwhelmed because Billy Q will just run him over, and that's that is something that could certainly happen. But at the end of the day, look, you take your UFC re-entrance on 12 days notice, 13 days notice,
which is another worry, but I guess it's a foot in the door kind of job.
Foot in the door. We know there is very little chance, it can happen, but there's very little chance that somebody of the name of Yusuf Zalal gets brought back in on short notice. Even if he loses on the weekend, it's rare to see that fighter then immediately cut. More 100%. Often than not, the UFC, the UFC will put him on another Apex card, and he'll have another go. Do you know what I mean? That's generally what happens.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, nice breakdown there. Let's just take you through some of the rest of the fights on the card really quickly. Luis Pagelo will take on Fernando Padilla at 145. Trey Ogden versus Kurt Holloway at 155. Ricardo Ramos versus Julian Juicy J. Erosa. I like that fight at 145. That should be interesting. As do I like Miles Johns versus Cody Gibson. That's an interesting fight. You got your technical striker in Cody Gibson, and your guy like hits like a Mack truck and Miles Johns. So that's an interesting stylistic stand-up. Stephen Nguyen versus Jarno Aarons at 145. Montserrat Hendon versus Daria Zelizenkova at 135. I don't know whether I got that right.
Nailed it.
Nailed it.
Absolutely nailed it. That was unbelievable.
I know. I was surprised myself. Hey, shine that severe spotlight on me for getting that name right, I think. Igor Cervino versus Andre Lima at 125. And we'll stop off with your guy, Mick Parkin, who opens up the card against Muhammad Usman in the heavyweight division. Honorary mention for Mick Parkin here on the rise up the heavyweight division. 8-0, undefeated in MMA, professional MMA, undefeated so far in the UFC at 2-0 after coming off the Contender Series in 2022. A good name, a winnable fight for Mick Parkin here against Muhammad Usman, Harry. It's an interesting one to kick us off for tonight.
This is an IQ test. If Mick Parkin grapples, he wins. If Mick Parkin does what he did in his last fight and jabs well and sticks behind that jab and throws some low leg kicks and tries to do the technical thing, he wins. If he goes in and tries to brawl with Muhammad Usman, he probably gets clipped, and that's the problem. So this is an IQ test for Parkin. I think this might just me be doing the storyline Dreamland thing, but if the UFC is going to Manchester, if there is any possibility that Tom Aspinall is defending his interim heavyweight title on that card, then I think it's always nice for the UFC to do storyline type things where guys from the same gym are fighting on the same cards. And if you go out and you beat Muhammad Usman, then Mick Parkin is on the main card of that Manchester card, and he is on it against a name that we actually know and actually respect in the heavyweight division.
Yeah, indeed. Good breakdown there. I like Mick Parkin coming in here on short notice as well. So taking the chance to UFC, I like that. Quite a number of fights fell out from this card as well. One of them being Shauna Bannon versus Stephanie Luciano. Unfortunately for Shauna, she obviously was forced to pull out with an injury. And I know she's hoping to kind of come back fairly soon as well. So I know she's disappointed. It must be tough watching from the sidelines on the card you're supposed to be on. So yeah, hopefully she recovers well. I think she's back training now. So hopefully we get to see Shauna back fairly soon. Let's talk about the topic of the week for us, Harry. And it's a thing that's going to be labeled in the discussion as Conor McGregor versus the UFC. And let me read out a quote from Mr. McGregor on obviously from the Mac Life. He was obviously out there doing the Roadhouse promotion and, was asked about a return. So Conor was quoted in saying, I was hoping for a December date, then a January date, then it keeps getting pushed back. Then I lose interest and stop training for a while. Not stop training. I'm always training, but stop full training and start drinking a little bit. So I'm going to go back, regroup, get full tested, and get ready to rock. The date is going to come, and then I'll be ready to rock. I was in response of a question on when his next fight is going to be. Nate Diaz took that quote, and Nate Diaz said, this was me for years before Conor even got here. They want you to die before you get out of these contracts. It is up to you to make something pop. No one is going to help you but you. Free Conor. It's St. Paddy's Day in this bitch. That's a typical sign off for Nathan Diaz. But I mean, we can laugh, we can joke, but there's a serious kind of discussion to be had based off the comments from Conor on what he's saying, based on the comments that's coming from the UFC and in particular Dana White, which seem to be contrasting. And obviously, the final thoughts on the outlook that Nate Diaz has on this situation. And it's a legit one too, that being said, in, UFC tendency to holding on to fighters at the end of their contract. It's a thing that Nathan Diaz had happened to him towards the end of his contract. And to me, it's plain and simple that this is, and I've talked about this a little bit. It's happening to Conor McGregor right now. And I want to start off the conversation by saying to anyone who reckons that Conor McGregor is not going to fight ever again, and people, it seems to be quite a common opinion right now. I mean, I'll ask you the question, like, what have you seen, Harry? Because I certainly haven't seen, because I'm going to take Conor for his word, and a lot of people don't really like to do that, but you're stuck in a predicament here where you want to believe Conor McGregor, whether you want to believe Dana White and the UFC on what's happening with his career. But first of all, is there anything that would give you the opinion that Conor McGregor is never going to fight again?
Possibly. I think it depends, right? Like, Conor McGregor is a fighter, has been a fighter, will likely always be a fighter. But I do think that there comes a time where he's already said it himself. He's always training, but he's not always full training, right? And I think what that means is that there's a level of interest, and that level of interest dies when there's no thing at the end. And Conor McGregor is not somebody that's ever out of things to do, right? There's never not going to be business opportunities for Conor McGregor, whether that's the Black 4 Gin, whether that's a whiskey brand that obviously is now sold and whatever. But there's never going to be sort of a drying up for Conor McGregor. There could be another film. There could be a this. There could be a that. There could be a next. There could be a boxing match. There could be, you name it, right? You fucking name it. There's always going to be something for Conor to sink his teeth into. And I think now that as he has this outlook and he has these options toward him, whereas previously fighting was the only option, and so he devoured that sport, his life is different now. And I think there comes a level, as with every man, where he's just going to lose his tether, and there is money to be made elsewhere. He is not reliant on the UFC for money anymore. And so can I see there being an outcome where Conor never fights in the UFC again? Yes, is the answer. If the UFC string him along forever and ever.
That wasn't the question though. Will he ever fight again?
Fight again? He fights again for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
If he fights in the UFC again, potentially not.
I think he 100% fights in the UFC again, to be honest, and 100% fights in general. Like, I mean, the situation that we're in with Conor right now is he's 2 fights left on his contract. The UFC are in, like we spoke about on the Severe setup a couple of weeks back, in the negotiation periods for a new TV deal, and having Conor McGregor on that kind of as a negotiation tool is more beneficial to the UFC than anything else in negotiations, if you ask me.
100%.
I'm not hearing, I'm hearing stuff that, his motivation factors for training aren't probably quite what they used to be, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to fight again. Plus, with Conor, even through his rise up, Harry, he was a guy who kind of did take time off in between fights and wasn't always actively training, and famously had to be kind of pushed back into the gym in some occasions as well to get going. Now, obviously, when he got to the UFC, that remained consistent, and obviously the results showed for themselves. But there was always this little bit of downtime. But the downtime does seem to be getting a little bit longer. Obviously, coming back off the injury, everything like that. But you have all of this. You mentioned the businesses. You mentioned the whiskey, the stout, the bar, the movies, everything like that. And while all of that is really good, it ain't fucking fighting, baby. It ain't fighting, and it ain't fighting gives you something. It's like a drug, so it is. It's like this addictive drug that you get this feeling from fighting of adrenaline that is unmatched in comparison to anything that you can experience in this life. And I think at this stage of Conor's career, he still has enough in him, even though maybe he isn't preparing his best as he once did. We don't really know, but I can guarantee you when something is at the end line that he will commit to a full camp, and he will come in at the best level of capabilities that he's able to do after such a serious injury. And obviously as a man who's getting a little bit on into his mid-30s now, into his late 30s as well, limitations are going to come up and catch you up. But I think Conor at heart is a fighter. He says he's a fighter. He still is coming out and saying that, doing all of his media work on Roadhouse as well. And you know what? Whatever it's worth, I believe him. I really do. I really believe him. When he says he wants to fight again, when he says he's going to fight again. Now, what we don't know is what's going on behind the scenes, Harry. And this is an interesting thing and it's the interesting battle that's happening between Conor McGregor and the UFC right now, where Conor is saying he wants to come back, and we have Dana White saying that he's not ready to come back yet, saying that he's not training, he's not in camp, but he kind of has been on occasion, and he's been ready to fight. I would like to think since the start of the year, realistically, since he got back into the testing pool. What's your overall opinion on the current status that we have right now? Because we have to mention Nate Diaz's comments in here as well, where the UFC could be putting McGregor on ice until they sign off on this new deal, and rather than have him fight in 2024, you want to have at least one fight, if not 2 fights in 2025 on the new broadcast deal, which is going to make the UFC and the broadcast partner and Conor McGregor quite a bit of money as well. But I think my overall opinion on where this could go is that it could get really, really dirty, really, really quick if the difference between what the UFC wants and what Conor McGregor wants gets further and further away from each other.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of where I said my potential of him not fighting in the UFC anymore comes from. Like, Conor is a shrewd businessman, and so are the UFC. But if we know something about both, is that they're both very, very stubborn, right? Both sides are very, very, very stubborn. Now, at the end of the day, money talks, and Conor McGregor is money, whether that's to Conor McGregor himself or whether that's to Dana White, right? I think that Dana is going to have to understand that at some point, you sort of eloquently said, Conor is getting to his mid-30s now. And so that star power is not going to be the same when he's 40. It's not. It's just not going to be the same, right? It's not going to be the same as when he's 42. It's not going to be the same when he's 44, etc., 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 right? So we are getting to a point of the Conor McGregor star power where we have to use it now. Right, we have to maximize it now. Well, I mean, I think we already maximized it, right? When he was in his Jose Aldo days and the Eddie Alvarez and the whatever, that was the maximum that we saw from Conor McGregor. But he is still absolutely the biggest bargaining chip in any TV deal that the UFC can possibly put together. And so I agree with you that they are going to want to have Conor McGregor in and around their opening gambit of pay-per-views when it comes to the new TV deal. Whether that means Conor McGregor is going to be around for that, I don't know. It certainly seems as though Conor McGregor, if he wanted to, has enough of a legal team around him to start to make things more difficult for the UFC. I think that Conor McGregor has the business now to start to make things more difficult for the UFC. But I suspect, as with most things that has happened in the McGregor and UFC sort of era of relationship, that cool heads generally prevail.
And his history has kind of suggested that as well, with the retirements, with, you know, obviously negotiations for fights and everything like that. And, you know, behind it all, Dana White and whatever he's saying, he did compliment Conor McGregor and being the best person that he has ever worked with and the best businessman that he has ever worked with. So I wonder, is it something down to the fact of UFC's current kind of nonchalance behind getting shit done? I mean, we're scrambling to get a main event done in three for UFC 300. We're scrambling now to feed up pay-per-view cards. And it seems to be like, you know, we'll think about next week kind of a job for the UFC. And, you know, that must be frustrating for McGregor. And that's the business model that the UFC have been working with under the last couple of years since Endeavor have come in. And we have to remember Conor McGregor hasn't fought all that much under the Endeavor banner as well. So, you know, that difference in the way things used to be done under the Fertitas and Zuffa is a lot different to the way things are done right now. And, you know, with a guy like Ari Emanuel, that guy knows how to cut big deals. And he was responsible for the $5 billion deal between the UFC or between the WWE and Netflix. And he's going to be majorly responsible. The next UFC deal is going to be monstrous. I can guarantee you that. It's going to dwarf, no matter where it's on, whether they'll spread it out, whether it'll be some on Netflix, whether it'll be mainly on ESPN again. I can guarantee it's going to be a monster deal. And I'm like I'm a parrot here. A part of that monster deal is going to be having Conor McGregor on your roster. But I fear if we don't see McGregor fighting this year, that he is going to have to get really, really aggressive and come on the attack. And I think that's where things will start to get really interesting, and it'll become a he said, she said kind of over and back, with two juggernauts with juggernaut opinions in Conor and Dana kind of going at it. With all said and done, Harry, if you were to take out the old crystal ball here now, when do you think we see Conor McGregor back again? And who do you think we get to see him back against?
He mentioned in an interview recently, it wasn't even an interview, it was passing, a guy had a phone in his face and was talking about, is he going to fight? And he said July 12th, which is around International Fight Week, whatever.
June 29th, I think, is the scheduled International Fight Week, I think, is that one, yeah.
Okay. So whether July 12th is the one in the Sphere, I'm not sure. But Conor mentioned July 12th, and he mentioned Michael Chandler. And so whilst I agree with you, actually, that I generally, you can't always believe what McGregor says, right? But
of course, yeah.
Generally, I would have him as being a more trustworthy source than one Dana White.
Yeah.
Now, did Conor say that to that guy as a way because he knows it's going to get out into the public? And is that a way for him to force Dana's hand? Is that the date he wants? I don't know. Obviously, we won't know until it comes around. But I suspect in and around International Fight Week is when we see one Conor McGregor back. And I do suspect it is probably Michael Chandler. If Michael Chandler has been willing to wait this long, I think he wait much longer.
I think the opponent is Michael Chandler. I don't think that's changing at all. I think the date is up in the air. Even with Conor, I see, you know, he's doing a lot of media now for the movie, and I heard him talking a little bit about, you know, I want to go before the end of the year. So now even he's moving the goalpost, but he's throwing out dates, and it's smart of him to do that. My prediction is that and I hope this isn't right. I hope I'm wrong on this. My prediction is we don't see him on June 29th. I think we see him maybe towards the end of the year on a Vegas card, and you knock one of those fights out of the window, and then you try and re-sign him for the new TV deal after he fights that last fight. I think they'll probably go with Israel Adesanya for International Fight Week against whoever. I think they'll probably force Strickus into that middleweight title fight with Israel Adesanya. And Yeah, no, if we're getting into the like the Decembers, or if we're getting into the September, Octobers, and we're not hearing anything about a Conor McGregor fight, I think that's where things are going to get super, super interesting. But that was the topic that we wanted to speak about this week. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up on the setup, Harry?
I just hope that we get to see him before it's too late.
Maybe it already is. That's
Maybe
your
it's already.
severe. Maybe that's the severe setup, and I don't mean that with any disrespect. I mean, you have to remember he's coming back from a horrific injury, and I don't think we will ever see the same Conor McGregor again. I think for him to get back into a position where he actually can fight again would be a tremendous turnaround. But you know, it's tough slogging, and being away from the sport for such a prolonged period of time never really is your friend overall. So, I mean, I would have been kind of maybe rude for me to just end it like that. Maybe it is, but there is reason and there's method behind that madness. So, I was the severe setup. Harry Powell at BJJ_Harry Powell at IONeil MMA. Thanks for listening. We'll be back for the breakdown next week.